Canada's Minister of National Defence issued a stark warning about the state of military recruitment.
If what you have been doing for decades is no longer working for you, you can't just keep doing it. And over the past 3 years, more people have left than have entered. That is frankly, it's a death spiral for the Canadian Armed Forces. We cannot afford to continue on that pace. We've got to do something differently.
The Prime Minister pointed to his government's investments in the military when asked about the state of the Canadian Armed Forces.
Over the past years, every single year this government has invested more in defence. We're going to continue to make sure that the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces have the tools necessary to step up.
So what does this all mean for the state of Canada's military? Retired Lieutenant General Guy Thibault is the chair of the board of the CDA Institute and a former vice chair of chief of the defence staff. He joins me now. General, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Hey, David, thank you for having me.
We got two very alarming comments and revelations, I think, about the state of the military this week. And I want to start with the first one from my colleague Murray Brewster. The internal report says only about 58% of Canada's military could be mobilized if there was an urgent need to support NATO. What does that tell us about the state of the armed forces in this country?
So I really appreciate Murray's coverage of this. It's talking about essentially the readiness of the Canadian Forces to undertake the missions that the Government of Canada has asked of it. And it covers materiel readiness, it covers the people readiness, it covers the overall sustainment ability of our operations. And so from the perspective of 58% of our material capacity ready, our vehicles, our major fleets, air, sea, and land, is actually quite alarming in terms of a demonstration of the underfunding that has chronically been afforded to defense for keeping these systems ready for operations.
Is it just underfunding? Because the other alarming thing to my ears was when Defense Minister Bill Blair said that the military is facing a death spiral on recruitment and that there are just more people leaving than there are coming in. Is the lack of interest because of the lack of funding, or is there something larger happening there?
Well, I think it's a great question to ask. In the last 2 days, we've had the Ottawa Conference on Defence and Security gathered to really look at the world and look at where the Canadian Forces fit in it. And we actually spent quite a bit of time talking about the state of the armed forces and the need to adapt to the changing world around us. The people problem is at the centerpiece of the Canadian Forces readiness. You can have the best equipment, the best capabilities, the best processes, all the money in the world, but if you don't have people, you don't have capabilities to actually undertake the operations. So the people problem has been, I think, understood for some time. This isn't a new phenomena. I think that COVID really hurt in terms of our ability to get out and really attract members to the Canadian Forces, or attract Canadians to the members of the Canadian Forces. And at the same time, you know, as we've seen, quiet quitting, people looking to move on. The demands of Canadian military service are quite demanding on the families. Our families are facing the exact same problems that the rest of the Canadians are having with respect to inflation, housing. So I think this issue of attraction, recruiting, and the problem of keeping people with you, when you combine the two of them, it makes for a major problem.
So what's the path out of this? I mean, we've seen increasingly international players weighing in on the level of Canadian military spending, right? The U.S. ambassador to NATO, the Secretary General. The Latvian defense minister is here saying we would encourage our allies to move towards that 2% NATO spending target. Not only is Canada not doing that, these deficiencies and these recruitment challenges are persisting. How do you move forward here?
Well, I think that you know, General Eyre, the Chief Defence Staff, has been very clear in terms of reconstitution. You have to start with people. That's the first part of the problem space. We actually have to fill out the ranks. We're well below what the government has authorized. So 15,000, a combination of regular and reserve forces. So we have to make up that delta, and you have to deal with the shortfall in terms of those who are leaving. So the number is fairly significant. So I think you start with making sure we keep the focus on recruiting. And I think that it's not that they're not doing anything. Like, I have to say that I believe that the team that's dealing with recruiting is trying to be very creative, very innovative, looking for new ways of doing business. I think this past year they've actually probably got to a point where they're pretty much going to break even. So the That doesn't sound too great in terms of traction versus retention, but at least it's stemming the flow, and I think they're turning the corner. And so I think that's a positive first step. I think the government is sending mixed messages, though, because I think that when we look at the budgetary constraints that the entire federal government is going through right now, has a really significant effect on the Canadian Forces, where the capital program isn't a problem. The government continues to fund the future capabilities. We're seeing the investments in new platforms, but where the squeeze is happening is in the operations, the maintenance funds, and that's where we really talk about training, the infrastructure, and that's the quality of the service life. And so I think if the members of the forces who are serving aren't seeing the investment in the organization in that way, it kind of is adding to the problem.
Right, you say breaking even on recruitment may not sound like a big thing, but the quickest way out of a hole is to stop digging, right? Which is also what the government's trying to do financially, which affects defense, right? Because there are these financial pressures in core government. The defense policy review, which we've been promised an update on for quite some time, keeps shifting and moving and shifting and moving. And what signal does all of that send to you about addressing these issues?
To the signal to Canadians about what the government's intention is, signal to the Canadian Forces themselves about the government's intentions to actually continue to invest in them as an employer of choice, and to giving them really the capabilities they need to execute the missions that they're asked to do. Signal to our allies in terms of the burden sharing, and I think the alliance and collective security is dependent on all of us working together for the purposes of deterrence. And when members of the alliance aren't necessarily living up to their commitments, it's sending a signal to our adversaries as well. So I think that we would hope that the defense policy update will show those new signals. We know, and I think the government has said that there's more to be done. I think Minister Blair is in earnest in terms of wanting to work on these problems and make things better. But in the short run, it seems like the government has concluded that things are going to get worse before they get better.
Right. Well, and in calmer times, you can kind of put defense spending to the back burner. Putin's invasion of Ukraine, it has not been calm since then. And Canada has committed to increase its presence in Latvia by 2026 to be leading the full capacity of the commitment there. But with the mobilization challenges, with the recruitment challenges, with the financial challenges, do you think Canada can meet its commitment to even the Latvian part of the NATO operation, let alone the larger 2%?
I think in operations, we have nothing really to worry about. The quality of the members we put in, the equipment we're putting in, that will fulfill our mission to Latvia. There's some urgent operational capabilities that we need to kind of really enable that mission, and I know that the government is moving forward on those. But the broader picture, I think, is to say, hey, look at Canada's north, and look at the Arctic, and look at an area where previously we haven't been too worried about it because it wasn't accessible. With climate change, we know that this is now going to be increasingly an area of strategic interest for Canada. And if we just tally up our interests all over the world, in Asia Pacific with the Indo-Pacific strategy, if we look at NORAD modernization, the approaches to the continent are working with the United States, look at additional kinds of threats, cyber or space. I think you can't help but conclude that Canada needs to invest more in its fundamental insurance for securing the country.
Just as a final point, the Arctic keeps coming up when we talk to people about what Canada can do. I know this is something the Americans would really like Canada to take a lead on, to sort of maybe take that off their plate a little bit, and show a commitment to continental defense, if not able to meet the full 2% of NATO. Do you think that should be the focus here, for Canada's own national sovereignty and national security, but I don't want to say appease the allies, but to demonstrate to your allies, in particular the Americans, that you are serious about at least looking after your own backyard?
I think that it's an essential feature to what we would hope the government will articulate in the defense policy update, is kind of a prioritization of where we're going to focus. We can't be everywhere and try to be everything to everyone. I think we need to make some fundamental choices. We talked a lot about the Arctic over the last couple of days. 7 of the 8 Arctic nations are now members of NATO. We had the Secretary General in Canada's far north last year, and I think it would be, really a way for Canada to contribute to collective security by focusing in on our own backyard in a very strong way.
Lieutenant General Guy Thibault, thank you for your time today.
David, you're welcome.